If I were to only briefly know anything about Australia, I would have thought either Sydney or Melbourne is the capital, but they're not. Have you ever wondered why neither Sydney nor Melbourne is the capital of Australia while they look like this, and while Canberra, the real capital, looks like this? Well, this discussion started back in the 19th century. In 1898, the Australasian Federal Convention in Melbourne was held, but they couldn't decide on a location for the capital city. From 1899 to 1908, many sites for the capital city were suggested, of which Sydney versus Melbourne was a topic. Being the two biggest cities in Australia, the rivalry is tight. In the end, as a compromise, the capital city would be midway between Sydney and Melbourne. Some consider this story to be a big rumor, that neither cities were actually up to debate about being the capital, but it does make for a good story. Along with other reasons such as Sydney and Melbourne's hotter climate, which they said, quote-unquote, white people cannot thrive in, the two cities were deemed unsuitable. The Constitution in 1901, the one that enabled 6 colonies to create the Commonwealth of Australia, stated that the Parliament must choose a site at least 100 miles from Sydney. At this point, you might be thinking, oh, so they chose Canberra to be the capital. Nope. Canberra didn't even exist at this point in time. It was essentially land where only a few groups of Aboriginal people lived. It wasn't even a city yet. In 1908, the Seat of Government Act established the Yass-Canberra region as home to the Australian Capital Territory, where Canberra is now. The first European settler named the area Canberra, coming from the language of the local Ngunnawal people, who were also known as the Canberra, Canberra, or Ngambra tribe. The name Canberra was eventually decided among various suggestions such as Austral, Austraville, Aurora, Captain Cook, Cocos City, Kookaburra, Dampier, Eden, Eucalypta, and Flinders. The name Canberra shows respect to the local Aboriginal people of the land and means meeting place, a perfect name for the capital city. Canberra is a purpose-built city, and we will now get into how it was built. In 1911, the Australian government established an international design competition for the design of the capital city. 137 designs were submitted, and Walter Burley Griffiths was chosen as the winning design in 1912. The construction of the city began in 1913. Walter Burley Griffin was an American landscape architect. His wife, Marion Mahoney Griffin, who was also an American architect and an artist, was the one who sketched the design from her husband's ideas. Griffin's design consists of 2 axes and a triangle. The land axis runs from Mount Ainslie to the War Memorial to Anzac Parade to the Parliament House, and the water axis is a lake placed perpendicular to the land axis. Yes, this gigantic lake is also man-made. The lake was named Lake Burley Griffin to commemorate the original designer of Canberra. The 2 axes cross at the center of the National Triangle, also known as the Parliamentary Triangle. The triangle consists of Capitol Hill, where the Parliament House is, representing the seat of government, the Defence Headquarters at Russell's, and City Hill, representing the civilians. The 3 points are connected by Commonwealth Avenue, Kings Avenue, and Constitution Avenue. You will be able to see this incredible design from Mount Ainslie Lookout, Canberra and Region Visitor Information Centre at Regatta Point, or Telstra Tower. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned how Sydney and Melbourne looks like this and how Canberra looks like this. The bushiness of Australia's bush capital is no coincidence. After all, Griffin implemented the principles of the Garden City movement in the design of Canberra. The Garden City movement is an urban planning movement in the 20th century, with Ebenezer Howard as the founder. This movement was established as a solution to social issues experienced in the cities. Howard thought that big cities were like huge magnets, attracting people from rural areas with the promise of work and more opportunities, which leads to overcrowding, poverty, and disease. It would be difficult to convince people to move back to the countryside, so Howard thought of the idea of garden cities, where people can experience the urban city life while being closer to nature. Houses would be a mix of architecture to ensure everyone can afford housing in any location within the city. Residents can work locally without having to travel to the city centre, as there will be local jobs. This would also reduce the overcrowding in one area. Garden cities would be connected to each other, and when one reaches full capacity, another can be built nearby, making up one big city. This leaves for many green spaces between urban areas. Canberra has separate zones in the form of districts, each with their own town centres to serve each small community. A missing feature of a garden city in Canberra is green belts, for limiting urban sprawl and preserving natural habitats, but the bush capital makes up for it by having many parks, gardens, an arboretum, and nature reserves, as well as tree-lined streets. Walter Belly Griffin grew up in Oak Park, a village 10 miles from downtown Chicago. Oak Park had giant oak trees lining the avenues, and it was a low-density suburban area, connected to downtown Chicago by railway. It can be seen that Griffin took inspiration from his hometown to design Canberra, as his sketch contained a heavy rail line and a tram network. However, the National Capital Planning and Development Committee thought that they were unnecessary, so Canberra doesn't have a railway at the city centre or a tram network. That is, until the government decided that Canberra does need a tram line due to the increasing population and demand for public transport. The planning for the tramway connecting Gungahlin district to the city centre started in 2012, and by 2019, the Canberra Light Rail Network services commenced. The original plan by Walter Belly Griffin, reserving corridors along Northbourne Avenue for the tram network, finally came true. Canberra is expanding the network by connecting another line from North to South Canberra. Meticulously designed, Canberra stands as Australia's peaceful and beautiful capital city. We have Walter Belly Griffin and Marion Mahoney Griffin to thank for their thoughtful master plan.